What if the quietest village you've ever seen was hiding a secret so dark it could ruin everyone who touched it? What if the person everyone admired was the one whose death would expose the truth they all tried to bury? And what if the killer wasn't a monster, but someone who believed they were acting out of love? Tonight, I invite you into a quiet mystery, a story where a single necklace speaks louder than any confession. This is the tale I'm about to tell you, the necklace that revealed the truth. Welcome to Briar Hollow, a village where gossip traveled faster than the river and secrets rooted themselves deeper than the old trees that watched from the hills. This was a place of trimmed hedges, polite smiles, and carefully managed reputations. Nothing truly shocking was supposed to happen here, until the morning they found her beneath the silver ash. The air was strangely still, as though the village itself had paused to listen. No birds sang. Even the breeze seemed reluctant to disturb the moment. Beneath the wide-spreading branches of the ancient silver ash tree lay the body of Ilara Vaughn, her pale dress smudged with soil, her necklace shattered into scattered beads that glinted faintly in the early light. The tree had stood at the edge of Meadow Lane for centuries, beloved for its shade and whispered legends. Lovers carved initials into its bark. Children played beneath it. Elderly couples rested there on summer afternoons. Now it bore witness to death. A thin cordon had been strung between wooden posts, but it did little to hold back the villagers. Faces hovered behind hedges, peered from windows, lingered at garden gates. Whispers floated through the morning air, some frightened, some thrilled, some already knew who was to blame. In Briar Hollow, tragedy was never just tragedy, it was conversation. Inspector Rowan Hale arrived with measured steps, his boots crunching softly against the gravel. He was a tall man with prematurely silvered hair and eyes that missed very little. He had worked enough rural cases to know that silence in small villages was rarely innocence, it was preparation. His gaze swept the scene, cataloging details automatically: the position of the body, the disturbed soil, the scattered necklace, the faint impression of shoes near the tree's roots. Then he noticed her. She was moving through the gathered onlookers without hurry, dressed in a soft gray coat and a modest hat pinned neatly in place. Her posture was relaxed, her expression calm, not curious in the way others were, but attentive, observant, thoughtful. Miss Marple, Rowan exhaled quietly. Of course she was here. She had lived in Briar Hollow longer than anyone could remember, a retired school teacher known for her sharp memory, gentle manners, and uncanny ability to notice things others overlooked. She never pushed herself into investigations, never demanded attention, and yet, somehow, she always ended up at the center of the truth. "Good morning, Inspector," she said pleasantly as she approached. "I'm terribly sorry to meet under such circumstances." "Mrs. Whitcomb," I replied with a polite nod. "I should have known you'd already be here." "I was out walking," she said mildly. "One tends to notice when half the village gathers before breakfast." Her eyes drifted, not rudely, not obviously, to the body beneath the tree. Ilara Vaughn lay on her back, eyes open, expression frozen in something between surprise and disbelief. Her dark hair spilled across the grass, and near her hand lay the broken strand of pale blue stones she rarely removed. Clara studied the scene quietly. "The necklace broke during a struggle," she said after a moment, her tone gentle but certain. Rowan glanced at her. "You think there was a struggle?" The clasp is sturdy. It wouldn't snap unless pulled with some force, and the stones are scattered outward, not fallen naturally." She tilted her head slightly. "Someone stood close to her, close enough for emotion to get in the way of care." Rowan sighed under his breath. "You never miss much, do you?" She smiled faintly. "People rarely do, Inspector. They simply don't look in the right places." Nearby, an officer carefully lifted a folded piece of paper from the grass, using tweezers. "Sir, there's a note." Rowan took it, unfolded it slowly, and read aloud. "Meet me beneath the silver ash. We need to talk. This cannot wait." No signature. Clara's gaze sharpened. "That sounds urgent." "And private," Rowan added. "Yes, and deliberate." She paused. Whoever wrote this expected her to come alone. Rowan studied her face. "You're already forming theories." "Not theories," Clara said gently. "Patterns." The villagers murmured behind them. Names began to float through the air like drifting ash. Elliot Crane, Jonah Pike, Mr. Alden. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a story. Because Ilara Vaughan arrived in Briar Hollow 6 months earlier, like a gust of warm wind through closed windows. She was elegant without trying, confident without apology. She wore city clothes in a village that preferred tweed. She spoke of travel and opportunity, and ideas that made people uncomfortable and curious in equal measure. No one knew exactly where her money came from. Some said inheritance, others whispered scandal. A few claimed she had simply reinvented herself, a woman running from something she refused to name. Whatever the truth, she drew attention effortlessly, especially from men. Rowan glanced toward Clara again. "You knew her?" "Not well, but I observed her. That can tell you just as much." He waited. "She liked admiration," Clara continued. "But admiration is a dangerous currency. It must always be repaid, and not everyone accepts the same price." Rowan rubbed his jaw. "We've already identified a few interested parties." "I imagine you have," she said quietly. He hesitated, then nodded toward the path. "Walk with me." They moved away from the crowd, down the narrow lane that curved toward the heart of the village. The silver ash loomed behind them, silent again. "She had visitors," Rowan said. "Frequent ones. One in particular, a painter renting the old mill cottage. Passionate sort, temperamental." "Ah, passion rarely enjoys rejection." "And then there's Mr. Alden, retired officer, respectable, reliable, always eager to help her with errands." Clara's expression didn't change, but something thoughtful flickered behind her eyes. "Reliable people often believe they deserve loyalty in return." Rowan studied her sideways. "You're saying either could be dangerous." "I'm saying," she replied gently, "that danger often wears the face of devotion." They reached the edge of the village, where a narrow lane led toward the post office and bakery, a place where news traveled faster than letters. "I imagine," Clara added, "that someone here knows more than they're saying." Rowan gave a small, humorless smile. That's usually the case.
The bell above the post office door chimed softly as Clara stepped inside. The warmth of fresh bread drifted in from the adjoining bakery, comforting and familiar. Behind the counter stood Mrs. Hensley, her sharp eyes already bright with expectation. "Well," she said, lowering her voice immediately, "I wondered when you'd come by." Clara smiled politely. "Good morning, Mrs. Hensley. I was hoping to send a letter." "Of course you were," she replied, leaning closer, "and perhaps hear a thing or two." Clara didn't deny it. "Such a terrible business, isn't it? Poor Ilara." Mrs. Hensley sniffed. "Terrible, yes. Surprising, not exactly." Clara tilted her head. "Oh!" She had trouble trailing her like perfume. Men, secrets, letters, always letters. Clara's eyes sharpened just slightly. "Letters?" "Yes, indeed. She received one just days ago. Thick paper, city stamp. She looked shaken when she read it. Didn't even stop to chat, and that was unlike her." "Did she say who it was from?" Mrs. Hensley shook her head. "Only that it was someone who wouldn't let the past stay buried. Her words, not mine." That phrase lingered in Clara's mind like a chill. "Did she seem frightened?" "Nervous," Mrs. Hensley said slowly. "Distracted, like she was waiting for something to happen." Clara thanked her and stepped back outside, her thoughts moving quickly now. A letter, a meeting, fear. The pieces were beginning to align. As she walked down the lane, two elderly women whispered near the tea-room window. "They say she fought with someone that night. I heard it was jealousy. Men like that don't take rejection kindly." Clara passed without comment, but the words stayed with her. Jealousy, pride, fear. They were familiar ingredients. Her steps slowed as she reached the crossroads where three paths diverged, one toward the mill cottage, one toward the old barracks, and one leading back toward her own modest home. She paused. The painter first, she decided. The mill cottage sat low beside the stream, ivy crawling up its stone walls like creeping fingers. The smell of oil paint and turpentine lingered faintly in the air even outside. Clara knocked once. After a moment, the door opened to reveal Julian Pike, sleeves rolled up, hands stained with color. His eyes were shadowed, his expression tight. "I suppose you've come about her," he said flatly. "I've come to ask a few questions," Clara replied calmly, "if you'll allow it." He hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside, canvases leaned against every wall, some abstract, some unfinished. One, half covered by a cloth, caught her attention, a portrait of Ilara, her gaze half amused, half knowing. "You captured her well," Clara said. Julian scoffed. She liked being seen. "Did she like being owned?" Clara asked gently. His jaw tightened. "She liked attention," he snapped, "and she knew how to use it." "And you cared for her." He turned away. "I loved her." The word hung heavily between them. "Did you argue recently?" He laughed bitterly. "Of course we did. She told me she was leaving, said she had unfinished business elsewhere." "And that upset you?" "Yes," his voice rose, "because she treated it like nothing, like I was just another distraction." Clara watched him carefully. "Did you meet her the night she died?" He hesitated, just long enough to matter. "We argued earlier that day, outside the tea shop, but I didn't go to the tree. I stayed here," his voice cracked. "Ask Mrs. Bell next door. She heard me pacing half the night." Clara nodded. "Did she receive any letters?" "Yes," his eyes darkened. "One especially. It frightened her. She wouldn't say who it was from, only that it came from someone who knew too much. Clara flanked her and turned to leave. Behind her, his voice broke. "I didn't kill her." She paused at the door. "I believe you believe that." Outside, the stream murmured softly as she walked away. Something about his grief was raw, unpolished, too exposed.
The truth, she suspected, lay elsewhere. As the afternoon light slanted across Briar Hollow, Clara felt the shape of the mystery beginning to form. Ilara Vaughn had not simply been unlucky, she had been afraid. Someone from her past had reached into her present, someone who knew her well enough to summon her with a single note, someone whose pride could not bear refusal. And whoever that was had chosen the silver ash for a reason. What if the truth wasn't hidden, but protected? What if the people who claimed to care the most were the ones most desperate to control the story? And what if guilt didn't always look like fear, but like pride, discipline, and carefully rehearsed calm? By late afternoon, Briar Hollow had settled into a tense stillness. Curtains twitched, conversations dropped to whispers. Every footstep on the lane seemed louder than it should have been. News of Ilara Vaughn's death had finished spreading, and now the village had entered its second phase, speculation. Miss Marple moved through it quietly, her pace unhurried, her expression mild. To anyone watching, she looked like an elderly woman out for a thoughtful walk. In truth, her mind was working with sharp precision, assembling fragments, testing them against human nature. She had learned long ago that lies were rarely complicated. It was people who were. Her next destination lay at the far edge of the village, beyond the row of trimmed hedges and neat fences. Hawthorne Lodge, home of Captain Leonard Ashford. The name alone carried weight. Ashford had served decades in the military before retiring to Briar Hollow, where he lived with impeccable order and minimal company. He was known for his discipline, his punctual habits, and his unwavering sense of propriety. A man who believed rules existed for a reason, and that people should too. And, Clara suspected, a man who did not take rejection well. The gravel crunched beneath her shoes as she approached the house. Everything about the place was precise: the symmetrical hedges, the spotless windows, the polished brass knocker. Even the air felt restrained. She knocked once. The door opened almost immediately. Captain Ashford stood straight-backed, dressed in a pressed cardigan and collared shirt, his silver hair combed neatly back. His eyes sharpened when she saw her. "Mrs. Whitcomb," he said, "I expected the police." "They may come later," Clara replied gently. "I hope you don't mind my calling first." He hesitated, then stepped aside. "Of course. Please." Inside, the house smelt faintly of polish and old books. Everything was in its place, nothing unnecessary, nothing emotional. He gestured toward a sitting room. "Tea? That would be lovely." He prepared it with practiced efficiency, hands steady, movements precise. Clara watched closely. There was a tension beneath the order, like a tightly wound spring. When they sat, he folded his hands carefully on his knee. "I assume this concerns Ilara." "Yes," Clara said softly. "I'm very sorry for your loss." His jaw tightened. "It is regrettable." Not grief, not sorrow, regret. "You were close to her," Clara continued. "I offered guidance," he corrected. "She was impulsive, bright, but undisciplined. I tried to help her find stability." "Did she ask for that help?" A flicker passed across his eyes. She appreciated it. Clara smiled faintly. People don't always show appreciation in the same way they feel it. A pause. She had many admirers, men who indulged her vanity rather than encouraged restraint. And you didn't approve. I believed she needed structure. Structure, Clara repeated gently, or control. His fingers twitched. She was planning to leave, he said sharply, running off again, making the same mistakes. You sound disappointed. I was concerned. There it was, the careful language of a man unwilling to admit desire. Clara leaned forward slightly. Did you meet her the evening she died? His answer came quickly, too quickly. No. Not a flicker of hesitation, just firmness. And the note she received, the one asking her to meet beneath the silver ash. I know nothing about it. Clara let silence stretch between them. It pressed softly, insistently. Captain, I strike you as a man who values honesty. You also strike me as someone who believes intentions matter more than outcomes. His jaw tightened again. Did you ever feel she owed you something? Gratitude, loyalty? His voice hardened. I invested time in her well-being. Investment implies expectation. He stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back to her. She misunderstood my concern. Or perhaps you misunderstood her independence. He said nothing. She rose slowly. Thank you for the tea, Captain Ashford. I won't keep you. As she reached a door, his voice followed her. She was reckless, he said. That kind of woman invites trouble. Clara paused, then turned. Or perhaps trouble mistakes attention for invitation. She left him standing rigid in his perfectly ordered room. Outside, the late afternoon sun slanted low, casting long shadows across the lane. Clara drew in a slow breath. Something about Ashford unsettled her. Not anger, not grief, but possession masked as responsibility. She had seen it before, and it had rarely ended well. Her next visit took her in the opposite direction, to a modest cottage tucked beside the stream, the home of Mrs. Elsbeth Rowan, neighbor to Julian Pike. If Julian had been all emotion and volatility, Mrs. Rowan was quiet, watchful, and uncomfortable with attention. The sort of woman who noticed everything and spoke very little. She answered the door with visible hesitation. Yes? Good afternoon, said Clara kindly. I'm Miss Marple. I was hoping to ask you about the night Miss Vaughan died. Mrs. Rowan's lips pressed together. I've already spoken to the constable. I understand. I only wondered if you might help me fill in a few small details. A long pause. Then, reluctantly, the door opened wider. They sat at a small kitchen table. A clock ticked loudly on the wall, counting each second like a metronome of nerves. You live next door to Mr. Pike, said Clara conversationally. Yes. And you were home that evening? I was. Did you hear anything unusual? Mrs. Rowan hesitated, then nodded. I heard him pacing, back and forth. It went on for hours. Did he leave? She shook her head. Not that I saw. His light stayed on, curtains drawn. Clara nodded slowly. Did you hear voices, raised tones? No, just movement. She hesitated, then added, he was upset. Anyone could tell. Clara studied her. Upset people don't always do terrible things. Mrs. Rowan looked down at her hands. No. After a moment, she whispered, "But sometimes they hide things for others." Clara lifted her gaze. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Rowan swallowed. "I heard someone else that night, later, footsteps on the lane." "From which direction?" "From the main road, toward the tree." Clara's pulse quickened slightly. "Did you see who it was?" "No, but I heard a walking stick. The sound was distinct, a measured tap, controlled, deliberate." Clara thanked her gently and rose to leave. Outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves skittered along the path like restless thoughts. A walking stick. Order, discipline, control. Her mind returned to Captain Ashford, to his posture, his precision, his quiet certainty that he knew what was best. And to the note, "Meet me beneath the silver ash." Someone Ilara feared, someone she felt obligated to face, someone she couldn't refuse. That evening, Inspector Rowan Hale met Clara near the small chapel hall where lanterns had been lit against the approaching dusk. "You've been busy," he said. "So have you. I hear you spoke with Mr. Pike." "Yes, emotional, volatile, but his alibi checks out." "And Captain Ashford?" Rowan exhaled. "He denies everything, claims he never left home." Clara met his eyes. "Did you check?" "We will." She hesitated, then said quietly, "Inspector, the truth may not look dramatic at first glance." He waited. "The most dangerous people are often the ones who believe they are acting righteously." Rowan studied her face. "You think Ashford did it?" "I think," she said carefully, "that Ilara threatened something he couldn't afford to lose, control over his carefully ordered world."
Rowan nodded slowly. "There's more." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small evidence bag. Inside was a leather-bound notebook. "We found this hidden in her bedroom drawer." Clara's breath caught. "A diary," she murmured. "Encoded," said Rowan. "We're working on it." She held the bag gently. "May I?" He hesitated, then handed it over. Clara studied the symbols, her eyes narrowing with recognition. "It's a simple substitution," she murmured. She wasn't hiding from experts, just from prying eyes. She traced a line with her finger, whispering softly as letters took shape. Her expression changed. "What does it say?" Rowan asked. Clara looked up, her voice quiet but steady. "He's becoming possessive, says he owes me everything. I'm frightened of what he might do if I try to leave." Rowan went still. "She doesn't name him," Clara continued, turning the page. "But listen to this. He insists he knows what's best, that without him I would fall apart." She closed the diary gently. "That isn't love," she said. "That's entitlement." Rowan exhaled slowly. "There's more." "Yes." She turned another page. "The letter came today. He says he knows where to find me. He says we must speak. I'm so tired of running." She met Rowan's gaze. "She agreed to meet him." "At the Silver Ash," Rowan said quietly. Clara nodded. A silence stretched between them. Finally, Rowan said, "If Ashford confronted her and she refused him, then his pride would have taken over, and pride, when wounded, is capable of dreadful things." Rowan straightened. "We'll bring them together, all of them. Let the pressure do what questions can't." Clara allowed herself a faint smile. People reveal themselves when they believe they're being judged, and when they fear being exposed, Rowan added. Outside, the bells of the chapel chimed the hour. The village of Briar Hollow settled into evening, as though the village itself were holding its breath. Doors opened more cautiously, conversations shortened, eyes lingered longer than politeness required. Word had spread that Inspector Rowan Hale had requested everyone involved to gather that evening at the old chapel hall. Not summoned, requested, but no one mistood the meaning. Miss Marple stood by the narrow window of her guest room, watching the mist lift slowly from the fields. She had slept little, not from fear, but from thought. Patterns had been arranging themselves through the night, settling into something unmistakably clear. Control, possession, fear disguised as care. She had seen it many times before, in many forms, wearing many respectable faces. Downstairs, the kettle clicked off. Clara descended and poured herself tea, her movements unhurried. Time, she knew, was already on her side. The chapel hall was modest but dignified, its wooden beams darkened by age and memory. Chairs had been arranged in a loose semicircle. Lanterns glowed softly, casting long shadows that trembled along the walls. Inspector Rowan Hale stood near the front, papers in hand. His expression was composed, but there was a tension beneath it, anticipation sharpened by responsibility. One by one they arrived. Julian Ike came first, eyes shadowed, movements restless. He avoided looking at anyone, choosing a seat near the aisle. Mrs. Elsbeth Rowan followed, quiet and pale, folding her hands tightly in her lap. Then Captain Leonard Ashford entered. The room seemed to stiffen around him. He walked with measured confidence, cane tapping lightly against the floor, posture perfectly impeccable. His gaze swept the room with calm authority, pausing briefly on Clara before moving on. He selected a seat near the center, perfectly upright.
"Thank you for coming," he began. "I won't pretend this is easy, but it's necessary." His eyes moved slowly across the group. Ilara Vaughan's death was not an accident. A murmur rippled through the room. Julian flinched. Mrs. Rowan clasped her hands tighter. Rowan continued. "We believe she was lured to the silver ash tree by someone she knew, someone she trusted or feared." A pause. "We are here because the truth has been circling this village for days. Tonight, it stops circling." Silence fell again. Rowan turned slightly toward Clara. "Mrs. Whitcomb has been assisting me. She has a way of noticing what others overlook." Clara inclined her head politely, then looked toward the group. "May I begin with a question?" she asked gently. No one objected. She took a few steps forward. "Who here believed they knew what was best for Ilara Vaughan?" The question hung in the air. No one answered. Clara smiled faintly. "It's an uncomfortable thing to admit, isn't it? Wanting to guide another adult's life." Her gaze drifted, unhurried, until it settled on Captain Ashford. He met it without flinching. "You were concerned for her welfare. You said so yourself." "That is hardly a crime," he replied coolly. "Of course not," she agreed. "Concern is admirable, but concern can change shape." She turned slightly, addressing the room. "Sometimes it becomes expectation, obligation, a belief that kindness must be repaid." Julian shifted in his seat. Clara continued. Ilara was young, independent, and determined to leave Briar Hollow. That frightened someone. Captain Ashford's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She had a habit of leaving and returning when things went wrong. Clara tilted her head. Did they go wrong, or did she simply outgrow the places that tried to define her? A ripple of unease passed through the room. Clara walked slowly toward the center, her voice calm but precise. Let's speak of the letter, the one asking her to meet beneath the silver ash. Rowan held up a copy. It was written in a careful hand, controlled, formal, no emotion wasted. She looked directly at Ashford. Very much like your correspondence, Captain. He said, That proves nothing, sharply. Perhaps not, she agreed, but context often does. She turned to the others. Ilara wrote in her diary that someone had become possessive, that he believed he owed him, that she was afraid. Julian looked up sharply. She never said that to me. No, Clara said softly. You wouldn't have. You frightened her in different ways. Julian swallowed. I never hurt her. I believe you, Clara replied. You were angry, desperate, but not calculating. His shoulders sagged slightly at that. Clara turned again to Ashford. You, on the other hand, are very calculating. He rose slowly to his feet. This is absurd. You're weaving stories. Am I? She asked gently. She gestured toward Mrs. Rowan. You heard footsteps that night, a walking stick. Ashford's hand tightened around his cane. You always use it when walking outdoors, do you not? It supports an old injury. Indeed, and you were seen earlier that day near the main road. I often walk. Of course. Clara stepped closer, her voice lowering. But you told me you did not leave your house that evening. His eyes flickered. You said you never went out. Silence thickened. Rowan spoke quietly. Captain, we verified the timing. You were not home between 8 and 9. Ashford's face flushed. You have no proof of where I went. Clara nodded. That's true, but we do have proof of motive. She turned toward Rowan, who opened the diary again. Clara read aloud carefully. He says he made me what I am, that without him I'd be nothing. He says I should be grateful. A hush fell. She was trying to leave, Clara continued. She had plans, opportunities. You knew that meant losing influence over her. Ashford's voice rose. I tried to protect her. From what? Clara asked quietly. From living her own life? He laughed sharply. You don't understand. She was naive. Men used her. She needed guidance. And when she refused it? His lips pressed together. You met her under the silver ash, not because you wanted to, but because you felt you had to, because you made her feel indebted. Ashford's breathing grew heavier. She told you she was leaving anyway, that she was done being managed. Rowan stepped closer. What happened next, Captain? Ashford's composure cracked just slightly. She was ungrateful, he muttered, after everything. Clara's voice softened, almost compassionate. And you lost control. The word seemed to strike him. I did not. You didn't plan to kill her, Clara said gently. You only meant to frighten her, to remind her of her place. The room felt frozen. But she resisted, Clara went on. She told you no, and for a man who believes order must be maintained, defiance can feel like an insult. Ashford's breathing grew uneven. You grabbed her. She pulled away. She fell. Julian gasped quietly. You didn't mean it, Clara said gently, but she struck her head, and in that moment, everything you believed about yourself, your discipline, your morality, collapsed. Ashford's voice came out hoarse. I tried to help her. But she was already gone. Silence swallowed the room. Ashford lowered himself back into his chair, shoulders sagging. I couldn't let them see me like that, he whispered. I've lived my life by rules, honor, control. Clara's voice was kind but unyielding. Rules do not excuse harm. Tears welled in his eyes, though whether from grief or shame was unclear. Rowan stepped forward. Captain Leonard Ashford, you are under arrest for the murder of Ilara Vaughan. Ashford did not resist. He simply closed his eyes, the weight of years settling upon him. As Rowan moved to escort him, Ashford looked up at Clara one last time. She trusted you, he said quietly. Clara met his gaze. She trusted you once too. The words landed softly and irrevocably. Later, as the hall emptied and lanterns dimmed, Clara stood alone near the doorway. The storm outside had finally broken, rain tapping gently against the windows. Rowan approached, weary but resolute. You were right, he said, about all of it. Clara gave a small shrug. People tell us who they are if we listen carefully enough. Julian passed by, pausing briefly. His eyes were red, his voice low. I never meant to make things worse. I know, Clara said. Grief often borrows anger's voice. He nodded, then left. Mrs. Rowan lingered, then whispered, she deserved better. Yes, she did.
When the hall finally emptied, Clara stepped outside. The rain had softened the air, washing the village clean in quiet streaks of silver. She looked once more toward the road that led past the silver ash tree. Truth had surfaced, not loudly, not cleanly, but honestly, and sometimes she knew that was the only justice the world allowed. What happens after justice speaks? When the crowd disperses, the lanterns dim, and the name of the guilty is finally known, what remains for those who must live with the silence afterward? And what becomes of a village when the story it whispered for weeks finally ends? Briar Hollow woke the next morning in a different mood, not lighter, not relieved, quieter. The rain had passed in the night, leaving the lanes dark and clean, the air sharp with the scent of wet stone and pine. Windows opened cautiously, doors creaked as if unsure whether it was safe to resume ordinary life. Truth had a way of rearranging things. Miss Marple stood at the small writing desk in her guest room, folding a letter she had just finished. Her handwriting was neat, deliberate, every line carrying intention rather than haste. Outside, the bells of the distant church marked the hour with a slow, steady patience. She paused, listening. No shouting, no gossip spilling across fences, only birds testing the morning again. Justice, she reflected, rarely arrived with applause. News of Captain Ashford's arrest had spread before sunrise. Some spoke of it in disbelief, others with grim certainty, as though they had always suspected but lacked the courage to say it aloud. To many in Briar Hollow he had been order incarnate, disciplined, upright, reliable, a man who corrected posture and habits, who believed chaos could be trained out of people. and yet the truth had revealed something colder beneath that order. Control mistaken for care, possession mistaken for guidance. By mid-morning, Inspector Rowan visited Clara to inform her that Ashford had confessed formally. The account was restrained, factual, stripped of emotion. He admitted to confronting Ilara beneath the silver ash. He admitted to grabbing her arm. He admitted to the shove that followed. He insisted, even now, that it had not been his intention. "It rarely is," Rowan said quietly as he finished speaking. Clara poured him tea. "Intention does not soften consequence." Rowan nodded. "He asked to speak to you." Clara looked up, mildly surprised. "Did he?" "Yes, before he was taken away." "And what did you say?" "That it would be your choice." She considered this for a moment. Outside, a cart rattled past, its wheels splashing through shallow puddles. "Perhaps it's better left unsaid." Rowan seemed relieved. "I thought you might say that." He hesitated, then added, "You should know, your observations made the difference. Without them, we might have chased the wrong trail much longer." Clara smiled faintly. "You were already listening. I only helped you hear." Later that day, Clara walked alone toward the edge of the village, following the familiar path that curved toward the silver ash tree. The ground was still damp, the leaves above washed clean by rain. Sunlight filtered through in pale threads, illuminating the clearing where everything ended. The tree stood unchanged, broad, ancient, indifferent. Clara stopped a few steps away. It struck her how ordinary the place looked. No mark of violence remained, no sign that a life had been cut short here. Nature, she knew, was never sentimental. She closed her eyes briefly. Ilara Vaughan had been many things to many people: lively, restless, ambitious, difficult, warm, too vivid perhaps for a place that preferred its people predictable. Clara had only known her through fragments, a diary, half-spoken fears, the impressions she left behind in others. And yet those fragments told a story clear enough. A young woman trying to step beyond the boundaries drawn for her, a man unable to losing his authority. The tragedy had not begun under this tree. It had begun long before, in quiet expectations and unspoken claims. Clara touched the bark lightly, then turned away. There was nothing more the place could give her. In the days that followed, Briar Hollow slowly resumed its routines. Shops reopened, conversations returned to ordinary matters, weather, repairs, small grievances. But something had shifted beneath the surface. People spoke more carefully now. They listened longer. They noticed things they once ignored. Julian Pike left the village 3 days after the arrest. He said his farewells without ceremony, his face drawn but calmer than before. When he came to see Clara, he lingered awkwardly at the doorway. "I keep thinking," he said, staring at the floor, "that if I'd said something sooner—" She interrupted gently. "Regret imagines power it never truly had." He looked up. "Your grief clouds judgment. That does not make you responsible for another person's violence." He nodded slowly, as if absorbing the words piece by piece. "I don't know what comes next," he admitted. "That's all right. Most honest journeys begin that way." He thanked her, then left without looking back. Miss Elsbeth Rowan visited later that afternoon, bringing a small parcel wrapped in plain paper. "I thought you might like this," she said, placing it on the table. Inside was Ilara's journal. "I couldn't bear to see it locked away," Mrs. Rowan said softly. "It feels wrong for her voice to vanish again."
Clara ran her fingers gently over the worn cover. "I'll take good care of it," she promised. After Mrs. Rowan left, Clara opened the journal once more, not to analyze, not to search for clues, but simply to read. The later entries were tinged with frustration, yes, but also hope. Plans sketched in half-formed sentences, dreams of travel, of work, of independence. One line stood out, written in firmer hand: "I want a life that belongs to me." Clara closed the book. "So did you," she murmured. That evening the village gathered quietly near the chapel, not for judgment, but remembrance. There were no speeches, no accusations, only candles placed one by one along the low stone wall. Each flicker flickered against the growing dusk. Clara stood at the edge, observing. Grief, she had learned, did not require spectacle. It required space. Inspector Rowan joined her, hands folded behind his back. "Will you be staying long?" he asked. "Not much longer." He nodded, unsurprised. "You never do." She smiled faintly. "Places like this don't need me once the truth has settled." "And where will you go?" "Wherever I'm needed next." They stood in companionable silence as the last candle was lit. Rowan spoke again, more quietly. "You know, people will talk. They'll say you see things others can't." Clara considered this. "I see what people show when they think no one is watching." "That sounds lonelier than it should." "It can be," she admitted, "but it's also a privilege." Later that night, Clara packed her small case. The room already felt less hers, as temporary places always did once their purpose was fulfilled. She paused by the window one last time. The village lay calm beneath the stars. Somewhere a dog barked. Somewhere else a door closed gently. Life continuing. She thought again of Ilara, not as a victim, but as a young woman who wanted more, who had dared to imagine a wider world. Perhaps in some quiet way that imagining still mattered. Clara extinguished the lamp. The next morning she left before most were awake. Mist curled low along the road as she walked, her steps unhurried. At the bend where the path narrowed, she paused briefly and looked back at Briar Hollow one last time. The village looked smaller from here, less imposing, less permanent. She adjusted her coat and continued on. Where she went next did not matter yet, only that she went. Far behind her, in a stone building that smelled of damp and iron, Captain Leonard Ashford sat alone.
What remains after a truth has done its damage? After the voices fall silent, the doors close, and the story no longer belongs to rumor or investigation, but to memory. Some endings arrive like slammed doors. Others fade so softly that one hardly notices the moment they pass. This one belonged to the second kind. Several weeks later, Briar Hollow had settled into something resembling normal life again. The market reopened fully. Children returned to their careless games near the green. The inn resumed its familiar rhythm of clinking cups and low conversation. Yet, beneath the surface, something had shifted. People paused before speaking now. They listened more carefully. They noticed discomfort where they once ignored it. It was subtle, almost invisible, but real. Stories, when they ended honestly, had a way of teaching quietly. The silver ash tree still stood at the edge of the path, its leaves turning pale gold with the approach of autumn. Someone had cleared away the fallen branches around it. Someone else had placed a small stone at its base, smooth and unmarked.
No name, no explanation, just remembrance. Miss Marple had not planned to return. She rarely did. But her route had curved unexpectedly, and one evening she found herself once again walking the familiar lane into Briar Hollow. The air smelled of wood smoke and early frost. Lanterns glowed softly in windows like patient eyes. She stopped at the inn first, as travelers often do. The innkeeper recognized her at once and smiled with something close to relief. "You came back." "Only passing through," Clara replied gently. "That's what you said last time." Clara smiled, neither confirming nor denying it. Her room was the same, simple, clean, faintly scented with soap and old wood. She set her bag down and opened the window. Outside, the village hummed quietly, alive but subdued. Later that evening, she walked again toward the chapel green. The candles were gone now, but the memory of them lingered. Memory had a way of staying even after the light was removed. She sat on a low stone wall and let the stillness settle around her. Far away, in a place of stone and iron, Captain Leonard Ashford woke to another gray morning. Time passed differently there. Without titles, without authority, without the structure he had once relied on, his days stretched long and formless. He was required to speak often, to answer questions, to account for actions, but rarely did anyone listen in the way he had once demanded to be heard. At night, sleep came in fragments. He dreamed of order, neatly aligned papers, polished shoes, straight-backed chairs. But the dreams always fractured, breaking apart into moments he could not rearrange. A raised voice, a hand reaching out, a sudden, terrible silence. He had tried, in the beginning, to frame the memory kindly, to tell himself it had been an accident, a moment misjudged. But time was relentless. It stripped excuses bare. In its place grew understanding, slow, painful, undeniable. Control, he realized too late, had never been care, and care, when it demands obedience, ceases to be care at all. In Briar Hollow, life continued. Julian Pike wrote occasionally, short notes, awkward but sincere. He had found work elsewhere, something steady and quiet. In his letters, he spoke of learning to live without chasing forgiveness from people who could no longer give it. "I'm trying to become someone who listens, even when it's uncomfortable." Clara kept these letters folded in her bag, not as burdens, but as signs of motion, imperfect, human motion. Mrs. Elsbeth Rowan tended her garden with renewed patience. She spoke less, but when she did, her words were thoughtful. Those who visited noticed that she asked more questions now than she answered. The village itself seemed to breathe differently. Tragedy had not made it wise, but it had made it more aware. One afternoon, Clara returned to the silver ash tree. Autumn had deepened. Leaves drifted lazily to the ground, gathering in soft gold clusters. The air smelled of earth and endings. She sat beneath the branches, hands folded loosely in her lap. In her coat pocket was Ilara Vaughan's journal. She had carried it with her all this time, uncertain what should be done with it. Some stories were meant to be protected. Others were meant to be returned to the world. She opened to the final pages again. The handwriting grew steadier near the end, more resolved. "I don't want to disappear into someone else's idea of who I should be. I want to choose my own days." Clara closed the book slowly. "You should have had that chance," she murmured. For a moment's thought,
She removed a single page, not the last, but one filled with hope rather than fear. She folded it carefully and placed it under a stone at the base of the tree, not as evidence, as remembrance. Then she stood and walked away, leaving the rest of the journal untouched. Some stories, she believed, did not belong to the world's appetite for explanation. They belonged to dignity. That evening, a small gathering formed again near the chapel. Not organized, not announced, just people drifting together as dusk fell. Someone brought bread, someone else brought tea. No one made a speech. They spoke of ordinary things at first, harvests, repairs, the coming winter. Eventually, someone mentioned Ilara's name, not with fear, not with accusation, but softly. She used to laugh loudly, one woman said, as if she wasn't afraid to take up space. I always admired that, another replied. The conversation moved gently on. Clara listened from the edge, unseen and content to remain so. She understood then that justice, when it truly arrived, did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered its way into daily habits, into how people treated each other afterward. Later that night, Clara packed again. Her belongings were few. They always were. Before leaving, she left a short note on the small table in her room. Thank you for your kindness. Take care of each other. That is how most harm is prevented. No signature. None was needed. She left Briar Hallow before dawn. The road stretched pale and quiet ahead of her, wrapped in mist. Birds stirred faintly in the hedges. Somewhere far off, a bell chimed the hour. As she walked, she reflected, not on the crime itself, but on what it had revealed. That danger rarely announced itself. That harm often hid behind respectability. That listening, truly listening, was a form of courage. She had learned these things long ago, but each place taught them anew. The world, she knew, would never be free of shadows, but neither would it ever be free of those willing to notice them. Far behind her, Briar Hallow settled into another morning. The silver ash tree stood quietly at the edge of the path, leaves whispering in the wind, and though the tragedy tied to it would one day fade into story, something gentler had taken root in its place. A shared understanding that lives are not possessions, and that silence, when broken with care, can save more than it destroys. Miss Marple walked on, not seeking mysteries, only listening for them. Because wherever people lived, hoped, feared, or loved, there would always be truths waiting patiently for someone willing to hear them. And she had learned long ago how to listen.